been a lot of focus in the work that we do in higher education and tertiary education. But what we've seen is that there's been so many opportunities and individuals and participants also moving across different sectors in corporate and in higher education, working across areas, working together, in the area of learning design as well. And today, I'm very excited that, we're hearing from some key industry experts who will be able to share their strategies and their practices and how they go about working with universities and obviously leveraging the areas of learning design. We'll explore some insights and hear from them around scalability, engagement, and perhaps different types of tools and practices that are currently in place to enhance the learning design experience, perhaps in universities and also in corporate sector, and how that's kind of done to exchange ideas. So what I would like to do is introduce you one by one, our esteemed panelists. So we have Amanda Ashby. Now, so Amanda is a learning and leadership manager at Oricon. She's worked in the corporate learning and development sector for over 20 years and spent the last 10 years working in the Big Four professional services firms across Asia Pacific and also globally as well, leading a variety of teams, building capacities across professional skills, digital skills as well. And certainly loves, learning experiences and enhancing that. And she's currently completing her master's in education, leadership and learning at UTS. Next, we have Gina Hardy. Gina Hardy is works in Alex Design Agency as the Chief Learning Officer. Now, she's a seasoned learning and development specialist with extensive experience across non-for-profit, corporate and education sectors. Now, she's also a council president at the Australian Institute of Training and Development, and certainly excels and very passionate about creating impactful learning solutions that drive organisational change and employee development. Certainly a strong focus, a strong passion with human-centered design and digital transformation and strategic leadership. So welcome, Gina. So that's fantastic. And last but not least, we have Kristen Hammond. So Kristen's a Senior Director of Academic Services at Rise Point, so formerly Wiley University Services. Kristen leads and manages the academic services team that is responsible across program development in management, product design, learning design, course production, faculty development, and also academic support. Kristen brings over 20 years of publishing experience across the secondary and tertiary sector, and also academic journals. One of the highlights, she was involved in publishing the Australia's #1 best-selling book, The Barefoot Investor. She's also had over 7 years in contributing and launching successful online programs across partnered Australian universities and also across the Asia New Zealand area as well to advance and also to advance these universities, these areas to grow and advance their missions. So you can see we've got wonderful, esteemed panelists for here today. So with Kristen, Amanda and Gina. Now, we would love the opportunity to obviously be able to have the floor ask questions. So the structure of our panel, we've got 3 or 4 questions that we have for our panelists. We'll play it, we'll keep it very conversational. We've got the chat area open. We've got my colleagues Kashmira and Kate monitoring the chat. So there'll certainly be opportunities to ask questions throughout the panel. But first of all, I've got a question. I'm just going to stop sharing at the moment. Stop sharing. And we have Gina, Amanda and Kristen up on. Just give me 1 second. All right. Now, the first question that I have for the panel. The first one is if you can shed some light, because our audience we have learning designers, third space individuals across our higher education sector here as well. Are you able to tell us a bit about what is a day in the life of a learning designer working in a non-higher education sector like? Like, what do you do? Like, spend most of your time doing? What challenges do you face? So I might probably, I see your head nodding, Amanda. So I might hand it over to you first.
Trying to think how to shorten the list of what my day looks like, and I was just thinking about the week. So it's everything from, it's probably a lot of talking throughout the week. So I think about a couple of days this week, it's talking to lots of different stakeholders to find out what the business problem is. And then we could start talking about whether learning is a solution. It's reviewing content that some of other learning designers have made. It's talking about budgets. It's looking at where do we need to grow skills in the business and what are we thinking of doing? And part of that is how do we engage with universities and different offerings and starting to do some research around. It's talking to people about a lot of non-learning solutions. So saying no to creating a lot of training because that's not actually going to solve the problem, which is never the most popular conversation to have with people, but it's hopefully the right conversation to have. And then really just listening to a lot of people who have great ideas and saying, how will that help the business, or what's the problem that we're trying to solve? So a lot of those conversations which may end up in something, and also always the urgent ones. So I think this week I just whipped up a workshop design for a facilitated conversation around a business problem. It's probably something people wouldn't think, oh, is that a learning task? But actually it's going to improve the capability of a group of people in our business, but we just needed to help structure through what that might look like. I'd be fascinated to hear what Gina and Kristen's days look like as well.
I think project management's probably the biggest part of being an instructional designer. So again, and it is definitely about stakeholder engagement. That's probably the number one thing that we do. And also a lot of IDs are doing facilitation. So they're actually doing, even if they're tiny little facilitators, they're actually involved in delivering quite often, and bringing that feedback back to the team and to the rest of the organization. So yeah, absolutely 100%, Amanda, what you were saying, it's just this ongoing spiral, and no week's ever the same, no day's ever the same.
I would echo all that Gina and Amanda have said. I think there is a lot of I think project management in a learning design role, it can sometimes be underestimated. Like, I think it's really important. It's a big part of the role. And it means that when you get to the learning design piece, you're well prepared to be able to do the learning design as such. So I do think that project management piece is really key. I have to confess that I work for an online program management company. We do work with universities, so we are a corporate as such, but we work with universities really closely. And I think a lot for us is really around understanding that university ecosystem. So I think it is that, understanding your stakeholder and how they operate, etc. So stakeholder engagement, stakeholder understanding, etc. I'd like to say that we spent more time investigating new things and new products and what have you, but you really need to carve out space for that, I think, and have that headspace and that time to be able to do that. But I think learning designers always need to be looking forward, keeping current, what's happening in AI, what new tools are available. So I'd love to see us spending more time in that space. But yeah, it's certainly an important part of the job, but maybe not something we do on a daily basis.
Oh, that's wonderful. Like, I can see, so there's so many things that it's to me, I believe it's very similar in terms of the role of learning designers, and sometimes the term third space has popped up quite a bit over the last few years as well, and it lends itself well to my next question. Learning design is obviously an interesting profession, and it's evolving in academia as well. And Kristen, you've alluded to the type of skills and what they need to stay up to date with. So for us, just the last few years, the term third space has popped up quite a lot, and there is often a lot of confusion around that. And also there's certainly a lot of opportunities to look at unpacking what it is and what they do in terms of their roles as well. I'm just curious, like just a bit more on what you were saying, and you alluded to that, Christian. What other things do you see and find that learning designers or third space professions do? Like within your team, you've got a huge team, I imagine, across what you're doing. Like, what are the type of things, like besides, understanding AI and what's out there with technology, what are the type of profession skills, maybe competencies that these learning designers or third space people will need to know, to help them with their career or to help them, do their job well with their clients, such as universities?
Yeah, I think, well, client management and project management that we all mentioned earlier, listening skills are really key. I think you need to really be able to establish trust with your client. And I think listening and really understanding their perspective and what they're trying to achieve with their learning is really key. I think flexibility, compromise. I do feel like, whenever you're in a learning design relationship with someone, it is a collaboration. It can mean compromise. It can mean negotiation. It can mean trying to reach consensus, and that can be challenging. And I think those sort of soft skills are really underestimated. I think the other thing is a bias for creativity and problem solving as well is really key. So, every day there's a new problem, I think, for a learning designer to solve. And, this is before we've even talked about what's the learning pedagogy, what are you trying to bring from a learning design perspective? So, I think there's a lot of skills that are transferable from other industries that you can then bring, and, you can then learn the learning pedagogy. So, if you do have good client management, project management, negotiation skills, I think they will set you up well for a career as a learning designer.
That's wonderful. And it's quite interesting that you do focus on that soft skills and that transferable skills, which I believe in third space individuals, that's a critical area as well in terms of movement between different workplaces on that. I'm just curious, Gina, is that something that you also see as well? Or is there anything that you see that's kind of different and highlighting in terms of learning designers in the corporate space, what other skills and competencies they may have?
Look, I think I 100% agree with Kristen. And I think probably one of the most relevant skills you can have as a learning designer is to be a collaborator. And you have to, there's a lot of letting go of your ego. So it's one of those jobs where a lot of times you're juggling, you might have 20 people that you're working with on a project coming from all different departments, and lots of people have opinions and lots of people have points of views about what things are meant to look like. And sometimes you have to wade your way through that. And so being an effective collaborator can make a really big difference. And so sometimes you're going to get slammed. You send something out for review, you're going to get 20 different points of views coming back at you. Everyone has an opinion that what they think is the most relevant thing. And you have to really put your ego in check and just think, all right, actually what I'm doing here is allowing myself to understand that I'm building this for the most effective impact. It's not about me. It's about what's going to be the best for the people in the organization. So it takes a bit of practice, I think, to get to that point, to not take things personally, to understand that you're the linchpin for the whole conversation very often. So definitely collaboration, I think, is one of the strongest skill sets you'd need to bring to the role.
And Amanda, just on what's being said as well, like we have across our special interest group, we have varying levels of learning designers, third space, academic developers, the whole gamut from, like entry level all the way to executive level across our special interest group as well. Just based on, there's been a lot of focus on transferable skills and collaboration, etc. For someone entering this field, and you've managed and you've led and you've worked with so many people, would you agree with what's been said, or is there anything else, or like any other advice that you would give to any entry level learning designers who really want to get into the role, perhaps looking at that corporate sector side of things?
It's so I've never really heard the phrase third space used in that way until a few weeks ago when you introduced me to it, because that's just such a foreign concept working in a corporate space. I always consider myself, I'm part of a people and culture team. We're developing people solutions as wider. And really think about when people come into L&D, and I think about how many job ads I've written for a learning designer, none of them look the same. None of the people I work with do the same kind of things. We have 4 dedicated, amazing learning designers that I'm working with at the moment, and they all have such different strengths. And at the core, they are fantastic instructional designers. And then there's different elements of graphics, creativity, building content in. It's interesting that, and I'd love Gina's perspective as well, because entering the industry, I meet more accidental learning and development and learning designer people than I meet purposeful. And I think I accidentally fell into it in my career early on, mainly because no one tells you, well, years ago at school, that you can work in an L&D role in a company. It's not something that's really known. And I think people come in usually in corporate, if they're not an L&D person, they'll come in either from a content side, so they've been an SME and they've loved it and they want to share knowledge, or they love to facilitate, usually present actually. They love to present and then they want to become a facilitator. And often think about then, great, what are the skills and things we need to complement and build you up, so that if you love content, please then don't be an SME who wants to give out 100 pages of PDFs to people, and we start complementing in. But I agree with Gina's one, like it is easier to skill people in who bring in problem solving, who are creative in thinking and are good at getting things done, and can definitely either have a natural style of questioning, or you can guide easy into that performance consulting space, which is, I think, one of the most critical ones. There's always, I've loved in lots of companies, SMEs that come into the team, bring that business knowledge and credibility, so it's then adding and shaping in. But it's an interesting one now. I talk to lots of people looking to get into, actually, no, not enough people looking to get into L&D. And I always say, start with an area that you really like. It might be facilitation, it might be content creation, and then you'll grow throughout it, because I'm not entirely sure what my job's going to look like in 3 to 5 years' time. Actually, probably even in a year's time. I'd love if anyone has any ideas and tricks in there. But Gina, I'm not sure what you see with people coming in the industry as well. And
yeah, look, and I did mention just before we opened up that I see a lot of people coming out of teaching who want to get into instructional design. I'm doing my Masters of Ed as well with QUT, and there's a lot of teachers in that course that are looking to transition to corporate, and they come from a very pedagogy-driven background, which is actually fantastic because it gives them a sense of putting together effective learning. But then there's a bit of a shock, because we are bombarded with people that don't come from that background. So they want, and who may think training is a solution to everything. And Amanda and Kristen, you'll know this. We're constantly bombarded, we need training. It's not about training at all. A lot of the time it's about a tool, or giving the manager some skills, or taking the focus right away from training, going, actually, there's other things that we need to support you with, and it might not be an L&D. Very often it's not an L&D thing. However, there are ways we can support you with that. And so people brand new coming into the ID world often think, yeah, I'm just going to build an e-learning course on Articulate and everything will be better. A lot of businesses now don't have time for 120-hour development of an e-learning course, when someone could watch a fast video or listen to a podcast or read an article. We now have this connectivism situation where we have people taking information from everywhere around us that doesn't require us to spend a lot of time putting a book online, which is what a lot of e-learning is. Some of it's amazing, but some of it's not. And so I think that's the shift, is that we're really getting people to understand that we have so many other ways to support people to get our mission achieved inside the organisation, so that they can do their job better, so that the business is successful and everyone feels that the biggest thing I've noticed with people, I was just reading in a Gallup poll, people are saying, I don't feel like I can do my job effectively, and then they get disappointed and then they leave. And that's why we have this massive engagement or disengagement problem in the workforce. And so one thing L&D can do is to help support the business so that people do feel that they're getting the knowledge they need to do their job well. But again, it's not always going to be training. There's so many other things. I've actually got a little slide, if I can just share it. And I was mentioning it before, like, of all the things that we could build. Let me just get out of that, sorry. I was just talking about this recently, and I'll just share it now. You know, there's so many other things that have nothing to do with training. Is that showing? You know, if you look at that, like there's so many things, there's so many solutions that are not training. And this is just part of what L&D does and what instructor design people can do. Like we can build communities of practice, we can do job aids, we can do at a glance tools. So rather than sending someone through a 30-minute e-learning course, we could just give them a printout that sits on their desk and they can immediately get access to something. We've got people going out, repair people going out in the field to repair machinery. They snap a QR code and it takes them directly to the resource that they need. So again, that's not about training, that's having access to information. And that's where I think L&D, we're now becoming curators and connectors of relevant information as opposed to being the sole source of information. And that's a big shift in the industry as well, I think, for instructional designers. So we've got to get savvy about all the ways we can give information to people. That's got nothing to do with training. So yeah, I've built this recently for something and I thought, yeah, you know what, there's a lot of stuff that we do. There's also, let me just stop sharing that. And I'll jump out of this one. There's also this amazing map that I found from these guys that talk about learning ecosystems. And I'll just pop that up as well. And this is all the things that we're doing I just look at it and think this is all the things, oops, sorry, all the things we're doing as instructional designers. Okay. So yeah, we're storytellers, change makers, you know, sense makers, designers, connectors, and that's what an instructional designer does in a lot of roles. All these things are part of our job, which is really fascinating and I think really exciting. If you want to come into L&D and start creating things, we pick up all of these things, not all the time, but they're parts of the role consistently. And I love this. I love this design. I think it's so beautiful. I think it just talks about the expansiveness of the role and what it involves. And then, you know, some people do it incredibly well. Some people are just picking up the bits as they go. And I think it's a lovely space to inhabit. And, you know, I'm excited, same as the other guys. You know, this is such a fun place to live in, this world of L&D. But yeah, look at all the amazing things, value adders, you know, process designers, learning designers, and we're reframes. We're very often space holders, helping people, holding a space for people to come and talk about what they need and how they can get a better impact for the business. So, you know, there's a lot of things that we do that are really exciting. And I love this map, makes me very happy.
Thank you for sharing that, Gina. That's yeah, I think the type of roles and various roles that, you know, learning designers, third space. And I know third space is relatively new to you, Amanda, but it's one of those things that we're kind of grappling with as well and trying to unpack what that means. And as you said, our individuals come from many different areas, whether they're straight up, you know, learning designers from that discipline or they're different subject matter experts wanting to work in that space. In our higher education space in universities or tertiary, we have learning designers who can be professional roles and also coming from an academia kind of profession as well. And sometimes, not often not, but sometimes these roles can be quite separated within our sector as well. You've got academics and you've got the professional staff members. Sometimes, you know, the skills and knowledge and experiences are similar. Sometimes they're widely different, and the type of expectations in terms of what they want to do. I'm kind of curious, like just from the panel, depending on your organization, do you have some advice in terms of, you know, these learning designers who may have more of an academic background compared to one who has not, maybe focused more on instructional designers? Is there any advice that you may have in terms of helping to bridge, you know, the gap between the relationship between academia and non-academia learning designers in these different areas? I might throw it all to Christian, since you know, Christian, you've worked with quite a few universities in this space, and I'm not too sure, like within your teams, do you have team members who may have come from an academia background, or you've had some experiences within your team dealing with academics? Do you see any gaps or separations or opportunities to build further bridges between these areas?
I think there's lots that can be learned from people with both industry corporate experience. For Gina and Amanda, I think you've both mentioned a lot of teachers looking to get into learning design as well. I think there's a lot that can be taken from teachers as well, and also academics. Like I think we're all working with adult learners, so there's a lot of similarity in what we do. I think it's just that the context is different. So it's an industry context versus a university context. So, you know, whilst I do acknowledge there are differences, I actually think there's a lot that is very similar. It just needs to be applied differently or thought about slightly differently. In terms of my team, I think it's actually really valuable, although we are working with academia and we are 100% in that university context. I think it's really important for us to bring in, you know, we do have a number of teachers in our team, secondary teachers. We even have primary school teachers as well in the team. You know, we've got people who have come from a corporate learning design background as well. Some have worked at, you know, some of the big four as well, other utilities companies and those sorts of things. And I think they bring a lot of industry perspective into what we do as well. And I think with what we're trying to create with university learning now is, you know, it's very much around what is career connection, what is industry connection, what are adult learners going to be able to do when they're able to graduate. You know, how can we make it authentic to what they will be doing in industry when they embark on their career, or, you know, if they're upskilling for the next job in their career. So I do think that industry perspective as well is really valuable in that university context. And I think if people were looking to try and move from an industry kind of role to a university context, I think that's an incredible skill-based, knowledge-based understanding of an industry, understanding of corporate that they can help bring to academia. You know, academia obviously also working with industry, etc., but it's maybe in a different context and in a different way. And so I think there's a lot that, you know, we can learn from learning designers on either side of, you know, the corporate and university fence. But I also, as I said at the start, I think there's a lot that's really similar. We work with adult learners. It's just about the context.
No, that's really good. I think that's really good insights to respond to that. And I think I might extend that a bit further. Like you know, a lot of you have, you know, obviously you're working in corporate as well, and all of you have worked for, you know, larger organizations where you're leading strategic changes. And similar to in our tertiary sector and across many different sectors, you know, resources and money is very scarce, and looking to ensure that we spend our funds properly is really important. And obviously scalability is a big thing for us in higher education. I imagine it's the same thing for corporate. But I'm kind of keen to get your insights just from the panel about scalability, like in terms of rolling out learning design or training packages, but not just training, just in terms of what you're doing for large organizations. Are you able to shed some light around the type of practices, maybe the type of tools that you incorporate, that you use as part of your learning design team to, one, scale up, but also maintain that quality out of there as well, in terms of some advice around that? Because for us, we're kind of keen to kind of see whether there's any differences or similarities in the university compared to some of the processes and approach that you use.
Can I you're right. Yeah, I was thinking, I was looking at that question before, thinking a lot of it's about modular design. So breaking down the content into smaller reusable modules makes it easier that means that we can adapt the training to different contexts. It also means when something changes or updates, which it regularly does, it doesn't mean we have to go and rewrite something completely. It means that we can make small modifications to the information, and then it keeps the product valuable and alive. And I think that's been a really big learning a lot of the time, is that we spend a lot of time prepping something, but often by the time it gets to the end, it's either not as current as it needs to be, or it needs to be already updated. And so I think that making it changeable and being able to pivot really quickly is a really important thing for scalability. That's what I found in my experience.
To add to that, Gina, I think in the university context, that can sometimes be, you know, much more difficult. You know, if you're dealing with a university with 50,000 students and maybe 3,000 academics, and each academic is essentially a learning designer. They're designing their learning for their students, and whilst universities might have templates and procedures and guidelines and checklists and those sorts of things, at an organization of that scale, and where that kind of learning design is decentralized with all that individual academics. And that's not to say that there's not a centralized learning design team who are looking at overall principles, etc., but they might not have the capacity to go and audit every single course, etc. That can be really challenging. So I think if you're managing a L&D function in a corporate, I might envy you at times around the kind of rigor and ability to audit and keep everything really structured and aligned and within templates and what have you. So and additionally, I think academics can also at times they like to make a lot of small changes. There's an update to legislation, let's change this, or I learnt something new here, and sometimes that constructive alignment that you've started with can change over time as well. So being able to come back to a learning designer, I think and have those changes made, I'm envious of that for you as well.
It's over to you, Amanda. You've worked with top 4 large, massive organizations. What do you see in your in terms of your work, in terms of scalability? And Gina touched upon sustainability across modular designs, etc. What kind of approaches do you see working in terms of scaling up and but also maintaining that quality at scale?
Kristen, please don't feel too jealous at times when you think about all the rigor we have. Worked with both centralized and decentralized learning teams, and so I think we're all going through the same challenges. The sustainability piece is a really interesting one, and I think it's only been over the last few years that we've really thought a lot. And I think probably COVID was a driver, with everything having to go online and virtual or digital in many ways, that how we could design better, to design once with tweaks rather than everyone doing it. And I've definitely been fortunate enough to work in big businesses where, do we need 18 different versions of how to do coaching and how to do all these things? And we think about the reusable ones. So there's a lot of governance that goes on where do you store things? And I think the questions that are asked, and certainly over the last few years, of is this something that's right to be investing in, and is this the right time to be helping the business with this, and really linking it back to what we're doing. So from a governance and strategy perspective, it's trying to be crisper and do almost less at times and be more focused, because there's so much happening in a business that when you start throwing lots of different solutions, what are the problems you're trying to solve? And then from a technology perspective, there's definitely specific e-learning authoring tools that we all use, and shared accounts. So exactly, templates, structure, governance around there. So we're looking at making sure it looks well designed, it is well designed, it's accessible. We use learning management systems sometimes with choice, sometimes with not. And then some, I think more things that I see a lot more lately are some very specialized technologies. So at my current role, we use a specific platform that is all about how to build leadership skills, and it has a coaching methodology, and there's nothing else we could use in the business, and it's brilliant. It's really well designed. It fits the purpose, but there's always that tension of how much technology do you give to people, and it becomes another place to maintain and hold data. And I saw a question popping up around ROI and different things, which I think would be a great next convo. Yeah, sorry, it's probably a very long way to say that I think we're all trying, and I don't think we've ever cracked it well on how to ensure. So you're definitely not alone in unis. It's hard, and also the tension of, I have lots of people in the business making learning, or what they might call training or learning, objects and stuff. And there's that tension of, great, what can we enable to support them? But also, if you want to run an hour session and talk passionately about audit or tax or something else, go for it. Like, we're not going to control all the learning. I think it's about how do we, that's a learning culture we want to create. So I think I've gone through times over the years of thinking, I've got to control it all. No, we've just got to enable it all and help people with what we can do.
Oh, no, that's fantastic. Oh, goodness. Look, I think there's a lot of synergies across corporate and higher education, certainly, that we can share and collaborate, and very similar, problems and solutions that we can share as well. Now, I'm just gonna just Kashmira and Kate, just looking at the chat area at the moment. Are there any key questions that we have from our audience stemming up from the chat area? Because I want to open the floor now up.
So thanks, Lynn. I think
Here's frozen.
ask this first one, or I can read it out to everybody. That what specific recommendation to bridge knowledge gaps or transfer knowledge or particular books, models, etc., that would be good for academics, learning designers to look into in order to have as a base for corporate ID work to be able to translate higher education skills in those contexts.
I'm sorry, I missed the end of that question. So was it books or ideas that would support higher ed into a corporate? Okay. So there's a couple of people on LinkedIn who I think are amazing. Someone's mentioned Kathy Moore, which is that action, which is fantastic. There's Nick Shackleton-Jones as well. Nick's written an amazing book, and it's all about what L&D is actually like inside the corporate world. And he gives some he's got a amazing model, and he has so much experience. He's run huge teams across amazing organizations and great success. Nick Shackleton-Jones and Will Thelmeyer. It's Thelmeyer, isn't it, Amanda? Yeah, and Will's got some amazing, Will's so smart and has these incredible things talking about evaluating what we're doing and what we're building and how to make that actually a valuable thing inside the organization. And I'll dig those out and pop them in there for you as well, unless Amanda's doing it. But yeah, they're two people that I'd particularly take a look at, because they bridge that world of moving what's actually relevant and taking core learning things inside an organization. And I think anyone on either side of the field can take that information and get a lot of value out of it.
So thank you. So there is another question. I have questions as well, but I'll ask what is in chat first. It's Kate. It says, Kate, do you want to ask this? Like, how much does the return on investment question?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I guess I was just noting in higher ed, something that I think we don't necessarily do particularly well all the time is around evaluation and the way that we might do things like market research and the way that we might report back on outcomes. I mean, I think everybody does that, well in certain situations and probably less in other situations, but I can imagine that when there is a clear business focus, that you may need to, there may be a stronger need to justify in that way. So I guess I was just wondering, how much does data and justifying return on investment come into, instructional design or corporate learning and development roles, and how do you, what kinds of ways do you navigate that, or what kinds of techniques do you use?
That's such a good question, because that's one I've been thinking a lot about this week. And I think that's probably one of the areas where assessment and evaluation differ so greatly. And I'd love to hear more about it from a uni and higher ed perspective. And I was thinking this week, I was reviewing some things, and, we're helping people write better proposals. And I've done this a lot over the year. The assessment of whether you've written a better proposal actually comes out if do you win the work through the client. We might build in checks and reviews, but it's it's often just so clearly applied on the job, whereas I love all my master's uni subjects and the assessments I'm doing. It's quite a different focus. So absolutely, and certainly, you know, when I've worked with learning governance councils internally as well, when we're saying we want to invest time and money on something, it's because we have to be able to prove that that's going to add value. And it's everything from, you know, leadership. Why do better leaders in our company, what that impact is going to make? But then it might be, you know, employee engagement survey, attrition, turnover. So it's always got to be linked to something. I've spent a lot of time over the years working in timesheet businesses. So getting people to do their timesheets and why that matters and different things. And it's almost never a training solution. It's always a behavior one that will look and say, great, now we've got timesheets in on time. That means we can bill differently or do something. I would say it's intrinsic to every conversation, and even more so in the ways of work. You know, everyone's working hard, tough economy, that it is often, if you're going to take people away from their day job, this is how it's going to improve their experience or their capabilities, and being able to link the two. And that's purely just because, as we all know in a workplace, there's so many different elements. There's your technical learning, how you're a better leader, great D&I, productivity, learning technology. There's just so much to do that it all has to be tied around, is it going to help people or overwhelm them? But Kristen.
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. I was just going to say, I think from a higher ed perspective, that return on investment, it is also being looked at really closely. I mean, they're reporting $600 million as being taken out of the higher education market with the, you know, university international student caps. So I think universities will be looking at that much more closely. And when, as an online program management company, you know, obviously we have our own revenue goals, etc. But we are in partnership with universities, so we have to be very aligned with them. And in many ways, we share those same challenges that they face because they're affecting, you know, our partnership. So looking at that return on investment is something that we do very closely. But we also have the student as the end user. So, you know, in a business, in a corporate business, you know, your manager says you're doing this training, you do the training. But the, you know, students are individual consumers here. And if they start and they don't like it, they leave. And so, you know, for us, we've got some really clear ROI kind of indicators, you know, around completion rates and those sorts of things. I think that are being analysed really closely in our businesses around, you know, how we are engaging students in their learning, whether we're delivering the kind of learning that they need, etc. But I also think, you know, there's so much data in LMS systems that, you know, I would love a data czar. Can I employ one? If my boss is listening, I'd really love one, you know, because I think there's so much more that we could learn to turn into really actionable insights around, you know, how adult learners engage in online learning, etc., that would benefit everybody in the learning community. So, but yeah, we've just got to be able to go into those data lakes and turn it into actionable insights and write some research papers and share it. So.
And I something that I really press for, so L&D teams very often the first people off the bus. So if there's a financial change in the organisation, because we're seen as a cost centre, historically where people will go, well, you're costing us, you're not actually producing anything. So I wrote an article actually on needs evaluation on LinkedIn last month, and I'll put the link there, just talking about the value of having a true needs analysis at the beginning of anything that we're going to build for anybody, because that holds everyone accountable. So then L&D can say, well, actually, the reason we're building this is because, and there's a very clear business outcome at the end of it. A lot of the time, in my experience in the past, L&D like to float under the radar, perhaps in corporate, and they haven't necessarily been committed like the finance or other departments, sales teams, to having a specific level of outcome. So we've had KPIs, but they're not financial because it's harder to measure. But I think now there's a massive shift, and I just responded to Kate saying that as well, that A lot of people, organizations still aren't very good at it. And so when we do training, they might have 5 faces on the training form. And the feedback is, did I get a smiley face at the end of my training session to check, was it of value? So that's great. And what it meant is that at that moment, that learner felt that that was a good experience. But when they went back on the floor, were they able to put that learning into action? And so the people that we need to be measuring inside L&D a lot of the time is middle management, who are working with these teams to say, did whatever you delivered to my team actually make an impact? Did it improve sales? Did we get a reduction in complaints? So we need different measures, not what we've traditionally been measuring. And so I think that's where we're headed in L&D. Now, what that means is a whole bunch more accountability for a lot of people in L&D teams. There's also a new measure that we're looking at is return on engagement. Again, which I mentioned before, there's a lack of engagement. So did we get a higher level of engagement from employees? Did they dive in? Did what you spent time with them on? Did you pulled my whole team off the floor for half a day? You cost me $50,000 in hours and costs or whatever. Was there actually value in that? So did they come back and were they able to manage a problem differently? Did they have a new framework for it? Did they have a new perspective? So they're the types of measurements that L&D has to move into in the future, I think, personally, to show our true value. Because even though we're called a cost center, we're actually a value add center. If we're doing it right, we are a value add center. And once we can show organizational learning that, then we'll get a big shift in how we're treated in the organization. So I think there's a lovely shift happening. I can see it. There is so much data. We're now living in a data-centric world, right? There is so many places we can pull information from. It could be when they're watching videos, we can see, you know, where did they stop in the video? Was the video rubbish? Was our content rubbish? We don't have an attention span problem because people spend 8 hours on Netflix. So what it means is if they're not sticking with our learning, then we're not providing interesting enough content or relevant content. So I think with regard to ROI, next level is going to be return on engagement. And I think those two things need to go hand in hand. And then I think we'll see a real shift in how organizational learning is working. And also that could also obviously be used in higher ed measurements as well.
That's fantastic, Susan. And that's a fantastic question on ROI, and that's across everywhere at the moment in terms of spending and getting the best bang for a buck, to put it very simple. Thank you for sharing all of that. Kashmira, do we have, I'm just thinking, do we have another question, or the floor has any other questions?
Yeah, not from anyone as I can see in, but please feel free to just unmute yourself and ask question if you do. And if there is no question from the floor, then I have a very, very basic question. And I'm asking in interest of people who wanted to kind of transfer into learning design field. So I have 2 questions. So the first is that because that learning designers does not need to have a qualification as yet in any of the specified contest or in universities, who should be the learning designers? Because I've seen graphic designer to technologists to teachers to just anyone coming in learning design and call themselves learning designer. And when they can't progress or do really well, they get disappointed and they started blaming the field. That, I mean, I'm not disappointing them by saying, oh, if you don't have knowledge, enough knowledge on something, don't come in. But I'm just trying to see if that's a right profession for them. And another question is, if someone wanted to come in your opinion, whether they should start from university or from private sector?
Oh, that's a good question. I think we have a lot of people that move into, again, and Amanda mentioned that we have, and this is my favorite term, accidental L&D, is a lot of people are very good at what they do, and then they move into sharing their learning, their knowledge, and then they become part of the L&D team, and then they move through the process. Some people are naturally good at understanding what makes learning stick. So do they have to have a qualification? Not necessarily, though I highly encourage everyone, particularly if you're in L&D, you should constantly be learning. That's our job. So I highly encourage everyone to go back to basics and just get your head around basic learning theories. You don't have to be a master at them, but again, understanding them so that you have so many more tools in your toolbox. So understanding the very basics is important. A lot of people just think seriously, they just think it's about coming online or coming on board and learning how to use Rise or Articulate and then putting something into Rise. That's what a lot of people have the perception of, and it couldn't be further from the truth. But, you know, that's not the worst thing, because it does teach them some things about how learning shapes out. If they're working with SMEs, very often they're getting sort of an apprenticeship skilling there. But I do think having some do you have to be qualified? No, but I think some basic knowledge like about learning theory and learning science is crucial. And I think it certainly impacts the quality of what they deliver.
Gina, I want Christine's and Amanda's, comments on this as well. But I also want you to comment on whether the universities or the advertising agencies, like whoever are seeking learning designers, do they understand what learning design is? That's
universities?
Universities, government, private sector. So because my personal experience is that I applied for one of the learning design position with the government agency, and I don't want to name it.
Yep.
But they started asking me whether I know coding, and that, and I said HTML, and I said like there are like software that creates coding and all that, and they said no, tell me the coding of X, Y, and Z, or how you code this. And I said no, I'm not a coder, and I have never claimed it that I'm HTML expert. I said I'm learning design expert. So that was very disappointing experience, and that was my only and the first and the last application with government agencies, a learning design position. But that's also a question, because quite often I have experienced that when I go to a learning design position, and I experience that the team or the panel, they themselves have no clear idea around what it is. And so their expectation does not match what I say. And I believe I understand learning design. And so what happens is that when they do not select me, or for that sake, any learning designer, it is a big disappointment for them, thinking that where am I lacking? Because I know at some stage I was so frustrated and say like, everything was good. I know this, I have PhD in learning design. What's the problem? But sometimes it's not me who is a problem. It's the other party. So I want your comment on that as well. And Christine, I think you have hands up as well. So please comment on this as well.
Yeah, 100%. A lot of people have no idea, like literally no idea. They just are going off perhaps what HR's told them, or what someone who worked in the team said. It'd be great if we had a learning designer who also knew coding. Okay, those two things are very different worlds. They're entirely different planets. So if you can find someone, you're getting lucky, right? You're kind of jagging that person. That's not standard. And I think even Amanda said the ads she writes are different every time, because what we're looking for is someone the role is going to be slightly different every time. And so I don't think there's any one set thing, but certainly we've had to fight for graphic designers in our learning design teams, because the boss wanted us to build graphic designs. Hang on a second, that's a whole different field. That's not building effective learning. That's building things that look pretty, which is also another trait in our industry, where someone goes, could you just make that look pretty? Okay, I don't think that's actually learning, but however, we'll give it a crack. So that's something that goes with it. But yeah, there is a massive discrepancy in what people think learning designers do and what they are and what they should bring to the party. But I think knowing how to build effective learning and make learning that sticks is actually the core part of our role.
Christine?
Yeah, I was going to add to, I think Amy's commented though, outside of HE, often e-learning designers are looked at as content builders. And Gina, you mentioned, or it might have been you, Amanda, Articulate and Rise. For me, that there is a distinct difference between somebody who works with the content and designs. And when I say design, I mean from a learning design, not a graphic design perspective. And then there's the graphic design or the technology piece of that, which might be the people that build in your LMS, or it could be your learning technologists as such as well. So I know when I advertise for learning designers, I will get a lot of resumes that really speak to somebody who's highly skilled in LMS settings and building things and coding and graphics. And so when I am looking for a learning designer, I immediately put those in the pile for when I next need a learning technologist for my team. So I think with what you can do now with LinkedIn and Seek in terms of just pressing a button and applying, I do wonder sometimes whether people who maybe their resume looks a little bit more learning technology focused, but they probably do have learning design skills, whether they're doing themselves a disservice by not actually tailoring their resume and their cover letter to the specific job, because I immediately weed those people out if they're not speaking to learning design as such. So yeah.
And I mean, don't you think, Kristen, that you have when you demand, not you but like overall, that you demand understanding of learning sciences, learning technology, graphic design, and all the LMS tools and all of that from one U7 physician is extremely unfair, and no other than learning designers, that job that I've seen, that there's so much demand and competition to get that.
Well, I think that's part of not understanding like all the aspects that can go into to creating great learning. Like you don't just get a learning designer and then turn it all out. You might need some media people involved. You might need your learning technologists. You might need people who can do graphics, those sorts of things. So, for me, when I'm looking for a learning designer, I'm looking for somebody with that learning design experience, the learning science, etc. If they just happen to come to me with coding experience, oh, great. How might I, be able to use that? I know, for example, my learning technologist actually comes to us with a broadcast media background. So I will, be able to benefit from that. But that's just by chance. If I didn't have somebody with that broadcast media background, then I would need to outsource for that or talk to my boss about resourcing for that internally. So yeah, there's no unicorn, but if I can build together a team that just by chance I can bring some of those other skills in, great. But don't expect you're going to find the unicorn.
I think it builds on Gina's comment at the beginning as well. Like I don't know how many years ago, but I worked in a learning agency, and there was a lot of e-learning, and e-learning projects would take 6 months, and there was dedicated IDs and developers and graphic and media. That just doesn't exist anymore. Also, the time for creation, the technology has changed. I would love to have teams of different dedicated specialities, but we don't get that headcount anymore. And this is also where we look at how we use technology in different ways. And I think it's tricky as well of, when you're looking through resumes, and I just saw a comment in the chat, you're right, there's so many good people and there has been lots of cuts in the market. So you're really getting niche on, oh, this is someone who's worked in this industry and understands this and has designed programs and rolled them out in this one. I think we've got a glut of really good people available, but the skills everyone's getting keeps increasing. Such a good example, Kristen. You hire people now with many talents. So we don't get to have all of the other things, and everyone's budgets get more limited. So all of a sudden, I didn't think I'd become a podcast producer as well, but that's now a side skill in as well. And you go where your interests are. So coding is not a common one, but also likely the last person in that role had that skill. So you kind of expect then that the next person, even though I would never look for coding ones. But
I think we're in learning, Amanda. So,
I know, we just get so many
we might be able to go and look up a course on coding and upskill. So, yeah.
Thanks, everyone. I think now
on that note, thanks, Kathmira, for the question, and such a stimulating, diverse set and robust set of responses and discussions here. But we do need to wrap up. But before we do, look, just like to give a huge applause to our esteemed panelists, Gina, Amanda, and Kristen. Thank you so much for spending the time in the last hour sharing some insights and really giving us some insights in terms of how corporate sectors work and how we can bridge the gap between what you do and also with higher education as well. Thank you so much for your insights. We certainly would like to continue the discussions as well. We've got so many questions, across this space. But what I'm seeing is that there's a lot of synergies and a lot of similarities, a lot of problems that we are also experiencing on both ends as well, and definitely synergies that we can collaborate and build on and leverage off the various areas that we've got. On that note, thank you so much, Gina, Amanda, and Kristen.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, everyone.
Great.
Guys, good to meet you.
Thank you.